Well, hello, TNT. Here it is, the week before Easter, and normally we would be getting together, but unfortunately we still can't. And here we are coming to you from my backyard, of all places. A great little place to be, great sunny afternoon, and you might even be able to hear the birds in the background chirping away. Um, but as we come into Easter, and especially at this time where we are not able to meet due to the circumstances with the virus and everything, uh, you're probably getting a little confused about what's going on and everything, and unsure of what the future holds. And you're not alone. You're not alone. Many people are having the same worries and the same concerns about what's coming. And back in the day of Jesus too, his disciples and many of his followers had a confusing moment that that they experienced, and it happened what would be called Palm Sunday, and that was something that we just went through this past weekend. And you may also know it as the triumphal entry, where Jesus comes into Jerusalem the week before his crucifixion. And and Jesus comes in, and it's all predicted. You can look back into Zechariah 9, and I'll read that verse for you. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, and it says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, the colt, the foal of a donkey." This was predicted hundreds of years before Jesus even showed up, before he was even born. And when the disciples and many of his followers saw him coming into Jerusalem that day, they expected something completely different. They didn't understand what he was doing, they didn't understand what he was going to do. Uh, they saw him as the Messiah, the one that would come to deliver Jerusalem. But what Jesus was coming to do was not deliver Jerusalem from the Roman occupation. At the time, Romans were in control of everything in Jerusalem. And Jesus was coming in to provide the ultimate sacrifice so that we could be saved from our sins. And Jesus comes to go to enter Jerusalem, and he sends two of his disciples into a nearby town to get a donkey. Now you'd be wondering, why on earth would he ride in on a donkey? Well, back in those days, the type of animal that a person rode on was very significant. When a king would come in a military type way to conquer, he would ride in on a horse. That showed power, that showed prestige, and it was something that the kings would do. Now, when a person rode in on a donkey, it showed that they were coming in peace. They weren't coming to conquer, they weren't coming to stir up the people or the government. It's showing that he's coming in peace. And he rides in on a donkey. And he comes in, and his disciples put on their coats over top as blankets so that he could sit on it. The crowds start cutting down palm branches, which is a way of showing respect, and throwing their coats down, also showing respect as Jesus is coming in. And they are expecting at this moment that he is going to deliver Jerusalem from the Roman Empire. As Jesus is riding in, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, uh, say to him, "Get these people to stop doing what they're doing. This is not right. This praise should only be for God. This is not meant for humans, not meant for man." And Jesus said to him, if these people stopped shouting out their praise, the very rocks that are under your feet would shout out in praise instead." And he leaves them, he goes up into the temple, he looks around and leaves. The disciples are confused, the people are confused, they're thinking, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't how it's supposed to be at all. Jesus is supposed to be our Redeemer. He's supposed to be the one that comes in and frees us. But that's not what he does at all. He leaves and walks away. Just when you'd think that the height of everything, like when you're supposed to, say if you're going in for a sport and you do all the practices. You go through all the selection stuff, and you're about to be either picked for the team or you won the championship. And instead of getting picked for the team, you show up and you walk away. You don't stay. Or you're about to win the trophy and you walk away. At the height of what you should be very happy for, he walks away. What we look at is someone being given that position, he walks away. And Jesus leaves and he goes and he hangs out with friends. For the next week, the week before his crucifixion, he hangs out with his friends, the closest people to him. And I've looked at these stories a few times, and I look at it as he's just gone through 3 years of public ministry, where he has been challenged, where people have just wanted stuff from him and not given anything back. But there was a small amount of people, his disciples and a few very close friends, that he would call home for the last week. And they were the ones that could strengthen him, keep him uh, focused and not distracted from what he was about to do. And then it comes to what would have been Thursday night, the night before the beginning of the Passover, where they have the Passover feast. And Jesus implements two things: a remembrance feast consisting of two things, bread and wine. You might know them as the Lord's Supper, you might know them as communion. Either way, it was something that Jesus said, this is what I want you to do to remember me. And at that moment, when Judas ends up leaving, he had already talked to the Pharisees about betraying Jesus. And he goes out and brings a crowd of soldiers, the crowd of the chief priests, and he knows exactly where Jesus is going to go that night. And he goes and finds Jesus afterwards at the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus comes to Gethsemane, and he's there with his disciples, and he takes Peter, James, and John and goes a little bit further from the rest. These were his closest disciples, the three, Peter, James, and John. And he goes a little bit farther and he prays to God. He prays, if there's any other way, any other way that salvation could happen without him having to go to the cross. But we see in the Bible that there is no other way. God doesn't say, oh, no, there's a different way that you can be saved. There's a different way that we can make salvation happen. It doesn't happen. There's nothing. Jesus prays 3 times and nothing happens. 3 times. And there's no other way. Just like that verse, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. One way, only one. And after Jesus finishes praying, he comes back to his disciples and says, look, it's time. Here's my betrayer. And you know what? Jesus doesn't run away. Jesus walks right up to them, right up to the people that would arrest him and take him into a trial at nighttime and condemn him even though he had done nothing wrong. And it says in Isaiah 53 that he came as a lamb to the slaughter. He didn't make a sound. He didn't anything that they accused him of. He didn't even try to combat. He didn't have any response unless they were asking him about his deity, being the Son of God. And he gets thrown from trial to trial to trial. And then finally with Pilate, Pilate says, fine, I don't want to have a riot. So instead of freeing an innocent person, he condemns Jesus to death so that he wouldn't have a riot on his hands with the crowd. And Jesus walks off. He is whipped by the Roman soldiers. He is punched. The beard on his face was ripped out of his face, out of his cheeks. And then they go and put a wooden cross, laid it on top of him. That was part of the what they had to do when they were being crucified. When someone was sentenced to crucifixion, they would put the wooden cross. They would have to carry it themselves as a form of humiliation to the person. And Jesus, he was so weak from all the torture and the whippings and everything that he couldn't even carry. He didn't have enough strength left in him to carry it. And one of the soldiers pulled in another man that was standing beside the road watching. Says, "You carry the cross. You do it." And this other man, Simon, carries the cross for Jesus all the way up to Calvary. And then at Calvary, Jesus, when they offered him a painkiller, wine mixed with gall, it's supposed to help deaden the senses, as it says, painkiller. He wouldn't even take it. He didn't want to have anything that would dull the sense of pain that he was going to go through. He was going to be fully alert for everything. And he stretched out his arms. I like to look at it. He stretched out his arms, say, "This is how much I love you." As much to take the nails on the cross for you and for me. It's quite a remarkable thing when you think about it. That this man, Jesus, the Son of God, would lay down his life for all mankind, for the chief priests and the crowd that were saying, "Crucify him, crucify him," to Pilate that said, "I don't want to ride on my hands. I'll give him over to death instead." To the very soldier that was holding the nail and the hammer. He was dying for each one of them. He was dying for you, and he was dying for me. Because he loves you. That's because he loves you, and he doesn't want you to suffer the penalty of your sin. The penalty of sin is forever in hell, separated from God, eternal punishment. It's something that I can't even understand. There's many people that try. How can you be forever in pain, forever in torture? But on the other side of it, if you accept what Jesus has done for you, Jesus paid the penalty for sin so we don't have to. We don't have to go to hell. What Jesus did, if you accept what he has done for you, you can have forgiveness of sins. He's already then paid the penalty, and you go to heaven, not hell. That's the exciting news of what Easter weekend is all about. Sure, it might be fun to go around and collect candies and chocolates and everything like that. But that is not the focus of Easter weekend. It's about Jesus Christ and what he has done for you and what he has done for me and everyone else in this world. And even though the disciples at that time were so confused, they ran away, they deserted him when he needed them most. When Jesus was being carried off, they ran the other way. When Jesus was put up on the cross, they were confused. They thought that he was going to be the one that would deliver them. And you might be very confused now about what's going on. Many people are very confused about that too. But one thing we can be certain, God is in control. God knows what's going to happen before we even think about it. God already knows what's going to happen. And I pray that you would realize that this Easter weekend, what Jesus has done for you is so much greater than anything you could ever imagine. He died for you. We'll see you again next week for the second half of the story.